Cageside with John Morgan.
And welcome, everybody. Another episode of Cageside with John Morgan. I'm your host, Eric McMahon. If last weekend wasn't busy enough in the world of MMA, we have another just stacked weekend this weekend before the big show next weekend. UFC on ESPN 51 was just this past Saturday night, record-breaking night. The night prior, Bellator happened. Another great card. Here to help me break it all down is the man, John Morgan. You can follow him on Twitter, JohnMorgan_MMA. What is up, brother?
I love it, brother. It is a great week. It's a pay-per-view week for the UFC, which those are always big, right? When you start talking about UFC title fights, I mean, those are amazing. But as you said, just coming off a busy weekend, I love where we're at in MMA and combat sports right now, man. There's so much. I remember the days not that long ago. It was like weeks in between cards. Right. Now we got to decide which one we're going to watch on which night, man. I love it. Bring me all the fights.
It's kind of funny you say that because, like, me and my wife are having this. I'm not going to call it an argument. I'm going to call it a very spirited debate.
A discussion.
With there may have been expletives, not on my part. Right? Just saying, you met my wife. She gave me a handful of times. Right? But she's like, okay, well, you have this podcast and you do the reffing and you do this. It's like, but then when you're at home, you're watching fights all the time too. She's like, when do I get a break from it? And I said, baby, I'm working. I'm working.
Listen, hey, martial arts in general is a lifestyle. You see what I'm saying? It is all encompassing. You're not
the man you married.
It's so funny you say that. I'll tell you what, when I first started dating my wife, I told her, I was like, look, she really didn't know MMA at all. She never really watched it growing up in Mexico. That's what I was like, well, look, I need you to watch this. And I'm like, look, I'm not saying you got to love it, but if you hate this sport, we're probably not going to work out so well together because there's a whole lot of it in my life. Fortunately, she has embraced it and she likes it as well. But yeah, man, it's MMA all day, every day. We squeeze some family time in, but you got to give us, it's MMA.
We squeeze family time in by indoctrinating our family into MMA. I saw your family at Power Slap. You got to see mine. I'll post it and maybe we'll show it on one of these episodes coming up. I'll get a better video. But I got my son going 1, 2, slip, slip, bam with the 3. And he's 4 years old, man. It's awesome.
That is so awesome. You got to start him young. Yeah, it's funny, man. Every night, man, I'm taking my kid to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training as well, man. And like you said, look, we joke, but there's real value, especially with children, man, to teach them. I honestly, let me just throw this out there before we talk about MMA. If you've got a kid, get them into training some kind of martial art. And I personally would recommend Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu if you can. If you got a great wrestling program in your area, wrestling is phenomenal as well. But get them in there, man. Just that discipline and that self-confidence that it brings to know, if they're out there and there's some bullies on the schoolyard or whatever, not to say that they're necessarily going to win if there ends up being a physical confrontation, but just to know that they don't have to be afraid, that they don't have to be intimidated. Because that's what bullies thrive on, right? Is I don't know what it feels like to be hit. I've never been in a physical altercation. I'm scared. This person says they're going to beat me up. And so you get scared and you get intimidated. Man, the confidence that it instills, it's unbelievable. And I see it in child after child after child. So, yeah, while maybe we're indoctrinating them just so they won't give us so much grief about our MMA watching, there is some real value to it as well.
And I say this all the time, and I say it to parents that ask me about jiu-jitsu or whatever, or the mats. I say, listen, whether it be wrestling or jiu-jitsu, get your kid into it. Number one, for all the reasons that you just mentioned, but equally as important, in my opinion, is that you understand the pecking order of life when you are on those mats. Sure. You understand that God-given ability will only get you so far when you are on those mats. And it's you have to put in the work to get better. And I always say the mats are a microcosm of life. And there's nothing that I've experienced in my life that shadows life, kind of like jiu-jitsu or wrestling does.
100%, man. What a great point. Yeah, I can't champion it enough, man. I really recommend it to every parent out there. And I get it. Maybe you're a little hesitant. I don't want to get my kid involved in combat sports training and that kind of stuff, but it's not. And the instructors understand that as well. Like you said, like you're teaching your kid to throw the combinations and that's great. but obviously children don't get in there and strike with each other. You know what I mean? They don't actually, they may hit mitts, they may hit a bag, but they don't hit each other because their bodies are still developing and you're allowing all that to happen. And the instructors understand that. If they don't, you're in the wrong gym and you take them out of there immediately.
Well, with our indoctrination out of the way, let's just go ahead and get into mixed martial arts and a busy weekend that we did have and are going to have this coming week. Let's start UFC on ESPN 51 from the Apex Center. First off, were you there?
I was not. Even though it was in Las Vegas, I actually watched from home. I was having some little issues around the house that I had to deal with, some things, so I had to watch it from home, but enjoyed it nonetheless.
Yes, it was record-breaking night. I think 9 of the 12 fights ended in a stoppage. That was the most in promotion history. But let's start at the top of the card. Vicente Luque, 22-9, comes off of a year absence and takes out the 32-15 Rafael dos Anjos. Now, a lot of people just say, oh, he was gone for a year, comes back. That's not that big of a deal. A lot of fighters do that. Yeah, a lot of fighters don't take off a year for a brain bleed as a result of a TKO loss that they had last August, then come back and take on literally the guy who has had more fighting time in the history of the company in Dos Anjos, and then put on a spectacular victory performance.
Yeah, this really was an important one. You know, it was one of those fights that coming into it, it didn't really have necessarily an immediate impact into like who's getting a title shot next and what are the rankings shuffle going to indicate. And so because of that, I don't think maybe the interest was quite as high. But if you dug a little bit deeper into what was going on, man, incredible story here for Vicente Luque. And you know, he really opened up afterwards about it. As you mentioned, you know, we went through this situation, a brain bleed. I mean, how scary is that? And he said, you know, his biggest fear above anything was just that he would never get to fight again, that he would never get to compete again. He loves the sport of mixed martial arts. He loves the opportunity to compete. And you can imagine those conversations you have with your family at home. You know what I mean? Like you're putting, you know, we say it, but this is a stark reminder. Like these athletes are going out there and they're putting their health on the line every time they potentially get in there and compete. And I think for that, they deserve some respect. He went out there, took the necessary steps, you know, got the proper treatment, the proper clearance, you know, took the time away to make sure everything was good. But still, there's that mental hurdle you got to get over. And I thought it was incredible for Vicente Luque to admit it afterwards. Like, hey, man, I was a little bit hesitant when I got in there. I was a little bit scared. But then, you know, ultimately kind of felt comfortable, got in there, understood that he was going to be okay, and turned in a very solid performance against, as you said, you know, the leading cage time fighter in the history. UFC over 8 hours in the octagon, a future Hall of Famer in Rafael dos Anjos. A great performance for Vicente Luque, not just because of the fight itself, but because everything that surrounded that fight as well.
So, with all that being said, and Vicente Luque, self-admittedly saying, I was scared to take a shot. I got in there. I felt good, knocked the rust off. Bam, he implemented his game plan. He doesn't take people down with the frequency in which he took down Dos Anjos yesterday. And he looked good all the way across the board. He did get hit, you know, probably more than he wanted. But when you're fighting a legend, that tends to happen, right? So this was an interesting fight for him, right? One to a guy who's not in the welterweight rankings, but one with the esteem of Dos Anjos does have. He passes it with flying colors. So what's next for him? He's in this limbo stage because post-fight, he did say, hey, I'm interested in bringing Dustin Poirier up to 170 and fighting him there. Could be fun. I don't know if the name value is necessarily there for Poirier at one. I don't know. So you see this kind of like in-between zone that he's in. Where would he go from here?
It's tough. It's a challenge for him because you're absolutely right. I think he's in a very unique position where he's a veteran of the game, right? So he's not necessarily wanting to fight you know, these up-and-coming contenders, these newcomers to the division, because he's trying to make his way up the ranks. So he came in ranked number 10 in the welterweight division. If you're in the top 10 in a division, you need to be thinking about the top of the division. But this didn't really take that big step forward. So I think this is one of those ones that he just kind of stays where he's at, to be honest with you, you know. And listen, I think there's going to be some interest in the type of matchups you give him as well. Now, the UFC actually sent him immediately to the doctor afterwards just to be safe again, right? Taking all precautions. So, you know, what kind of matchup do they want to give him? Do they want to kind of keep easing him back and maybe give him a more grappling-based fighter? You know, maybe put him up against a Sean Brady type fighter or something along those lines. You know, we'll see. He's had a lot of experience in fighting the top athletes in the division, so there's some rematches that don't really make sense right now because they've happened before. he's in a weird spot. It's one of those ones where there's no clear next move, and so I think it's going to be really up to the UFC matchmakers and what they decide to do. I love those fights where you get done and you go, oh, we already know what's next for you.
Yeah.
We know what's coming up. And I think that's why coming in this fight, maybe there wasn't quite the buzz around it because it just didn't necessarily lead to anything. But listen, he's still a relevant name in the division, still very much a contender. And I think, a big fight is coming next, but it's not going to be, a number one contender type fight.
Now, Dos Anjos, watching that fight last night, like, listen, we know what a dog Dos Anjos is, right? And a former 155-pound champion, literally, has fought in the who's who, has gone from 70 to 55 back. He teeters back and forth. He's always been mostly a 55er. That's where he had most of his success. I think last night, in my opinion, with the size disparity, is it going to be too tough for him to get to that upper echelon of the 170-pound division at his size?
Yeah, I think it is, unfortunately. I think the reality of the situation for Rafael dos Anjos is he's got to make a decision into what interests him in his career. Right now, he says it's another run at a championship, right? He's a former lightweight champion. He says he wants to get there again. I don't think he can do it in the welterweight division. I think the size really does become an issue for him with the elite level. Now, not that he can't compete with anybody. He can compete with anybody in the division. He's certainly capable of going with anybody, as he proved last night. It was a good fight. It was there. But I think if he really wants to make a championship run, it's going to have to be at 155 pounds. And I think that's going to require some sacrifice on his part that he's got to decide. Like, he's not a big dude, but man, he is thick. He's muscular. It's not an easy cut, I don't think, for him to get to 155 pounds. So, he's a guy that can fight anybody. His name recognition, as you said, the who's who list of who he's competed against throughout his entire career, he deserves any fight that he gets. But I think he's got a decision to make. If it's just about maybe some big fights, he always loves throwing that Conor McGregor name out there. It was a fight that was supposed to happen. I don't think Conor's going to be interested in seeing it happen. But it's fights like that, like where you just pick a name that seems like it'd be exciting and you do it at 170 pounds. If he wants to do that, let him do that. He deserves it. If he wants to make a title run, I think he's going to have to make that sacrifice and make that commitment to go back to 155 pounds.
You know what? I agree, but I just think at 47 pro fights into his career, it's astounding to actually say 47 pro fights into his career, cutting that weight. At that point, I'm just surmising here, the juice might not be worth the squeeze.
I agree. I don't hate the idea of just saying, hey, I'm going to stay at 170 and I'm just going to take some interesting fights. You got to imagine as long as he's been in the UFC, his contract's pretty good. He's probably making good money. I think they said that was his 11th main event. So, the UFC knows they can put him in these positions and he's going to be there. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think it's a hard place to be, right? Because I think you hear a lot of fighters say, like, why am I doing this if I'm not trying to be the best? And so I think it's a difficult, maybe mental state to be like, you know what? I'm just going to take some fun fights. I'm going to take some good fights. I'm going to put some extra money in the bank, but I'm not really going to make a run to the top because I don't think that's really in my future right now. It's a hard place to get to as an athlete and as a fighter. So we'll see. But listen, the guy deserves to do whatever he wants. And if it stay at 170, I just think he's going to have to realize, all right, well, then let's just pick the most intriguing fights possible, the most exciting fights possible, and realize a championship run probably isn't in the cards.
So we talked about it earlier. You said a little over 8 hours in the octagon, 8 hours, 26 minutes and 49 seconds to be exact. That is the most in UFC company history. Let's think about that.
Jarring.
He has had more cage time fighting than the average American's work day.
And think about that. But in the octagon the entire time, competition time, fighting at the highest level, by the way. You mentioned the who's who list of who he's been in there with is stunning, right? I mean, to spend that much time in there, and boy, you just can't. I mean, that is the type of experience that you literally just can't teach. You cannot put a value on that type of comfort level because man, we've talked about the nerves that you get stepping in there as a referee when you're under the bright lights, you know what I mean? Much less the guy that's going in there with another trained killer on the other side of the cage, the nerves that you feel in there. So to go in there that many times, to be in there that much time, to be able to kind of slow things down a little bit, to comprehend what's going on, because it's chaos, right? I mean, when you're in there, things are happening so fast. It is utter chaos. And these athletes are so good, they make it look like it's not chaos, but it is. It is happening so quick. So to be able to mentally kind of slow things down, understand where everything's happening, that's the type of thing that only comes with having that much experience the way RDA does. That's an astonishing mark. 8 hours and 27 minutes. That's crazy.
All right. Not only that, he has the second most significant strikes in UFC history. Do you know who's number one?
Max Holloway?
Max Blessed Holloway, the Blessed Express. You did know.
I knew he was up there. I was taking a guess. I wasn't sure if he was number one, but I knew he was way up there, man.
I think Dos Anjos was somewhere around like 28 or 2,900 significant strikes, and Max Holloway's at like 3,200 significant strikes.
It's insane. And again, let me just read this real quick. Vicente Luque, Brian Barberina, Rafael dos Anjos, Renato Moicano, Paul Felder, Michael Chiesa, Leon Edwards, Kevin Lee, Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, Robbie Lawler, Neil Magny, Tarek Safdie, Tony Ferguson, Eddie Alvarez, Donald Cerrone, Anthony Pettis, Nate Diaz, Benson Henderson, Jason High, Habib Nurmagomedov. I could keep going. Those are just consecutive names. I didn't pick and choose. Those were literally consecutive fights the RDA has. It's unbelievable.
Do you think he may be one of the most overlooked like legends in the history of this fight game?
I do. I really, really do. I think because, he's not a big trash talker, because he's just a pretty humble, respectful dude.
And because the Conor fight fell through.
And that's what I was going to say. That was the breakout moment. That was the moment that everything was supposed to happen. That fight not happening changed a lot, man. And I think that's one reason he always kind of mentions Conor's name. Like, hey, it was supposed to happen. Let's go do this. It's amazing to think how things could have changed and turned had that fight come to fruition.
Man, in the co-main event, Cub Swanson gets a W, but he didn't even think he won.
Yeah, it's what
I didn't think he won either.
I didn't think he won either. I thought he won the third round. I thought he lost the first two. He got the decision. Felt bad for Hakeem Dawodu because he's a guy that has a bright future, I think, and it's kind of been on the cusp of, kind of contendership and discussion, and this is a big setback for him. I imagine the matchmakers are going to treat it kind of like it was a victory and give him another fight. But I'm torn because Cub Swanson is such a great dude, right? I mean, and I love it. The fact that he even came to the post-fight interview and they're like, do you think you did enough? And he's like, no, not really. I mean, the fact that he's that honest about it and open about it, and then shares his emotion, and he was great in the post-fight media scrum talking about the importance of his kids being there and how it's, it adds nerves, but he wants them to see reality of what it's like. And how can you not cheer for Cub Swanson? So I was torn on that one, because on the one hand, I'm like, well, good for Cub Swanson. He's a legend and he deserves to win. But on the other hand, I didn't think he won either, man. So it was a little bit of a frustrating one overall. But Cubs, all right, we'll always cheer for that.
Always cheer for Cub Swanson. And like, God, I hate to. The worst thing about the worst thing about Cub Swanson and kind of like the story career that he has is he's almost like, and I feel bad for saying this, you got to put him into that Ben Askren category of like, they're always going to be highlight reeled, and it's unfair, damn it.
So it is true, right? I mean, that's one of the worst ones. The Jose Aldo knockout forever will be entwined in people's memory. But this dude's a warrior, man. He, still going strong. I don't know how long he wants to keep doing it. And now he's kind of getting into the next phase of career, managing and coaching fighters and trying to help the next generation out. And again, just a good family man, is always taking care of his kids. And we'll always cheer for Cub. But yeah, this was a weird one.
Khalil Rountree added another knockout to his impressive list. 8 of his 12 UFC victories, or 8 of his 12 victories, shall I say, not UFC, have come by KO or TK over Chris Daukaus, who quit his job to then now make sure he's fighting full time and kind of lost 4 straight, but like against killers.
Yeah, Chris Daukaus came through the CFSC, so because of that, I've always got a little cheering interest. Now, Khalil Rountree actually called some of his fights as an amateur here in Las Vegas, so I cheer for Khalil as well. I'm so proud to see where he's come, all the way to where now he's talking about a title run, and my gosh, what a scary individual he is. For Chris Daukaus, it was tough, right? So you talked about, walking away from the police force in Philadelphia to focus on full-time fighting, and then in this fight, he made another significant change. He said, look, I was in the heavyweight division. I know I'm not a natural heavyweight. I'm a natural light heavyweight. I'm gonna cut down. Makes the cut down. But then this pairing, I mean, you talked about the kills you face to cut down a division and then to fight a guy like Khalil Rountree, who could probably knock out everybody at heavyweight as well if he was fighting in the heavyweight division. I felt a little bit bad for Chris. I thought this was a rough matchup to give him in his 205 debut. But Khalil Rountree now is talking about, hey, put me in a main event. I'm ready to make a charge to the top. And that dude is look, he's scary, man. When he lands, you go out.
He is scary striker, right? But let's get back to Daukaus really quick because I'm just going to read this. His past 4 fights: Derek Lewis, Curtis Blaze, Jazino Rosenstruck, and Khalil Rountree. Give me a freaking break, man.
That is ridiculous. He made somebody mad at the UFC office. So he did. He's got some matchmaker. He upset somebody along the way, man. No easy rides.
That, if you want to talk about a gauntlet, that is a gauntlet. You know, it's like, oh, we're going to come down to 205 and we're going to get your feet wet. Nope, Khalil Rountree.
Yeah, I really hope they'll give him at least one more shot at 205. Give him a different matchup and see how he stands up to it. Because he looked good. You know, he made the move down there and look, physically looked good, better than he did at heavyweight. And then, like you said, but you're just facing an absolute devastating wrecking machine. And yeah, it's been a tough run for him. Hopefully they'll give him one more.
So you're saying Daukaus came through CFFC, you got to call his fights. Another guy who came through CFFC was on the undercard here, the 3rd ever Twister submission victory in company history. Damon Blackshear.
Pretty cool.
It never gets old seeing a Twister. And I say never gets old, but it never happens. So the 3 times I've seen all 3, but it never gets old.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. You know, when you say that something, whatever it is, if it's only happened in UFC history 3 times, that goes to show you the rarity of it. I mean, when you consider how many UFC events and fights there's been, pretty incredible. And yeah, to see Damon Blackshear do it was cool. And I'll tell you what else I thought was really cool about it was afterwards, he was like happy about doing it. So he's like, I saw that on tape. He's like, I watched the way that, when somebody's on his back, the way he kind of reaches back, and I identified that on tape, and I was like, I'm going to hit a twister on this guy. So to identify through tape study an opening in somebody's tendencies to know that you can attack and that you can exploit, that's awesome. That's smart. And Jose Johnson, for him, hopefully he'll hear that and be like, oh, well, somebody saw this. I got to shore that up, or somebody else is going to hit me with it too.
Yeah, and just when you're the recipient, listen, I've been put in a twister before, right? So it sucks, first of all. For what people need to realize, it's like a spinal lock, right? It's a neck and spinal lock. I mean, your body is not meant to contort that way while your hips are being, stuck in place. So your whole spine is twisting. Just, that's bad in itself. But it's hard position to get into. Usually when you're thinking you're taking the back, you're getting one hook in properly, and you're almost like having to reverse engineer that for a twister. And it's a really interesting position to get into, which takes a high level of skill to even recognize it.
It really does. And it was pretty cool to see Damon Blackshear do it. And as Jason Liederfine of the CFSC pointed out, now, Bryce Mitchell is another one that hit a UFC twister. He came through the V3 Fights pipeline, which is now part of the CFFC family. So 2 of the 3 twisters in UFC history came through the CFFC pipeline. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's a stat. My thought was we need to get Korean Zombie on a future Fury grappling card, so that way we can say we have all three in the CFFC family. But yeah, pretty cool to see. I was super hyped to see Damon Blackshear do it. I can't help it, man. When I get a chance to see these guys and call their fights, as they're making their way up the ranks, and then I get to see them, succeed at the highest level. It just gets me excited, seeing guys chase their dream and really reach that level. So I always pull for guys. It was cool to see that from Damon Blackshear.
I love that too, especially as a ref that's on the regional scene and hopefully going to be in the Octagon and Bellator cage here pretty soon. But sitting back and watching these fights, sitting there, and I tell my neighbor or my friend or my wife who's watching with me, I say, I ref that guy. They're like, oh, really? Yeah. And like Bryce Mitchell, I think I've refed probably 4 of his fights coming up. I refed probably one of the best fights I've ever refed was Bryce Mitchell. I talked about it here. Bryce Mitchell versus Mariscal on a regional card. Are you kidding me?
pretty amazing, man. I love it. I really do. I've been fortunate to be a part of, Tough Enough here in Las Vegas for many, many years, seeing guys starting out the amateur ranks. Got a chance to call Ronda Rousey when she was an amateur and then saw her, all the way to UFC Hall of Fame. It's so cool to see it. And we're going to see it coming up, man. Dana White's Contender Series. I was actually just watching some old tape last night, man. I was getting ready for some trips and throwing some old CFSC events. And, not even an old one, just recently, but seeing the news of, Raheem Forrest and Danny Barlow all coming up on their Contender Series fights real soon, man. It's I love it, man. It's just something cool about, again, seeing guys, chase their dream and make their way up the ladder. It's so cool. So love seeing Dana White's Contender Series back.
And really quick, I want to just talk about, because anytime you bring up Rambo, Raheem Forrest, and Danny Barlow, I always think this, right? When you can look at two guys, particularly from the same city, amazing, that are both going to the show, and I'm telling you, I've been around this game long enough, and everybody put a check mark by this episode. They are both top 15 UFC fighters within a year and a half. Do you agree?
I love it. I think they absolutely can be. They have the talent there. You got to get some breaks that go your way, right? I mean, matchups mean things. Just staying healthy, right? So that you get the fights. I mean, sometimes injuries can play. So you got to get some things to break. But if you're just looking at talent, you look at the talent, you look at the body of work they put in there, they absolutely can, man. Man, look, Memphis area is cranking out some talent right now, man. And we've been able to see it with CFSC. I love, the shows that we've been able to do in Tunica and kind of see the talent level developing there. It's so awesome to give them a platform like that, and I can't wait to see them on the next level.
Back in the 80s and 90s, it used to be like the kickboxing capital of the country, and now it's fastly growing that way in mixed martial arts too. The talent that's coming out of here is ridiculous. But let's move on. Bellator was on Friday night. Logan Story, TKO's Brennan Ward. And did you watch Bellator Friday night?
I did. Yeah, I did watch it as well. And kind of, unfortunately, the result that I expected, I guess I'd say. And I don't, when I say unfortunately, it's just, you kind of, I thought Brennan Ward, he's got such an incredible story, right? Mm-hmm. This Brennan Ward redemption story, man. I think a lot of people, because he's such a character, he's such a personality, he's so exciting that I think a lot of people were like, man, if he can win this fight and fight for a title, and but Logan Storley, he just does what Logan Storley does. That dude is good, man. His wrestling base is incredible. And Brennan Ward, was able to kind of stop it a little bit initially, but eventually Logan Storley just took over. And I know Brennan didn't necessarily like the stoppage, but Logan Storley was in control. So another great performance from him.
Nobody typically usually does.
Yeah, right? Yeah, nobody gets up and says, thank you, ref. I was really in a spot that I didn't think I was going to be able to get out of. And I appreciate you identifying that situation for me. Thank you, sir.
But the job of a referee is to protect the fighter from the fighter.
That's so true. That's so true. And most of, I know Frank Mir, obviously a legend of the game, a Las Vegas guy. And I called some fights with him over the years. I know he was one that always say just let me go out. Let me fight as long as if I go unconscious, I go unconscious. But it's like, yeah, but you don't necessarily need to take that. And we need to make sure that you're safe to fight another day. So I know it's tough. And that just shows you the warrior mentality that these fighters have, but physical health and safety means something. And sometimes the dudes are too tough for their own good,
You said Frank Mir, which segues me perfectly. I don't know if you planned this or not, but Frank Mir was on the call of a fight card, their third ever fight card. They held it last night in Mesa, Arizona, the United Fight League. I think everybody needs to jump on board on this promotion. It's a real up-and-comer. They're streaming all their fights live on Rumble. Their next one is going to be, I believe, in December. They're during tournament format. I think they have a 85, 35, and I think, another tournament going on. They have tournaments going on right now. They give all their fighters under contracts equity stake in the company, which is pretty cool. They give them health insurance, just not for the fight, the whole camp prior, pre and post. If they're under contract, they have health insurance. But part owners in it are Rampage Jackson and Frank Mir, which you just said. Frank Mir was on the call last night for Rajon Jackson, Rampage's son, making his pro debut last night in Mesa, Arizona. Now, his last amateur fight, Jackson's last amateur fight, I was the ref. I was the man in the cage for it. And he took on a local kid here, knocked him out in the first round, ground and pound. I recognized really, really early that Jackson, he just has tons of power for a 155er. But last night, we got to see him in his pro debut, taking on a Stephen Collins, who is also making his pro debut, a guy who had a fallout fight on CFFC, so he didn't have to miss any camp, takes a 2-week short notice fight to take on Jackson and beats him by unanimous decision. The legend's son takes an L in his pro debut.
It's tough, man. There was a lot of attention on that. There might have been as much attention on him as anybody else in the card because he is the son of a legend in Rampage Jackson. And, with that comes a little bit of added pressure. Like I said, most people don't have that kind of eyeballs in your debut. And on the one hand, it's a good thing, right? I mean, the thing about mixed martial arts is, you're trying to get attention. You're trying to get people that want to watch you fight, win or lose, that they pay attention and they're willing to pay the price of admission to see you compete. That's a good thing. But it comes with some responsibility as well, and it comes with some pressure that a lot of people aren't necessarily used to dealing with, especially that early in their career. And so frustrating to come up short. I mean, the great thing about MMA, I think, is that, as a sport, we understand that. It's like in boxing, you got to be 30-0 before anybody cares about you. And if you lose along the way, it's like, oh, that guy's no good anyway. Some of our legends, I always point to guys like Randy Couture, BJ Penn, it's legends of our sport whose records aren't necessarily spotless. They may be just a little bit over 500 because they took on the biggest challenges possible. So this is certainly not the end. It's a frustrating start for him. But I think plenty of upside. As you said, a lot of people saw the talent in the amateur ranks. Obviously, he's got access to some great training with
AJ McKee.
Yep, incredible training partners there. Team Body Shot, man, that's an amazing crew out there. He'll go back to the table and rebuild. I think there's still bright days ahead, but this was a very, very shocking result for this promotion. And as you said, a cool promotion with they're just getting started. This is their debut year. As you said, they got these tournaments. They're working towards crowning some champions at the end of the year. They're just getting started. They got a long way to go to get to the top. But man, the concepts that you said to give all the fighters insurance, to give them equity stake, it's pretty cool what they're trying to do.
So we look at this kind of fight last night, and especially with Jackson versus Collins, both making their pro debut. We obviously know the acclaim that Rampage's son's coming in, and just the name alone. But this speaks to me, right? Because Rampage's son's got talent, right? It's not like he's devoid of talent. He's got huge talent, huge power. I saw it firsthand in the cage. When he hits you, it is thudding. Okay. But he's taking on a guy who's like, oh, okay, he's coming off the couch, only 2 weeks notice, making his pro debut. And I'm not saying this is what they're thinking, but this is what the common fan is thinking. How good could he really be making his pro debut, 2 weeks notice? Guess what? That's how far this game has come. The amateurs of now would have been of 20 years ago UFC champions. That's how
100%.
far this game has come.
100% true. You're so right about that. I mean, listen, I've said before, literally take whoever you think is the worst fighter on the UFC roster, whoever that person is. And I'm not asking you to call him out, but I'm just saying in your head, if you're like, if you're a common fan out there and you've watched somebody fight and you're like, that dude is not very good, I don't even understand why they're in the UFC. They would wreck shop at UFC 1. They would just absolutely wipe everybody out, Royce Gracie included. No disrespect to the legend in Royce Gracie, but that's just how far the game has evolved, man. It really has. I mean, it's incredible to see, and I've seen it firsthand. You see it firsthand. Some of these guys, like I said, working with Tough Enough out here, an amateur organization, CFFC, in certain regions that we go to, we have both pro and amateur fights depending on the commission. And some of these amateurs, I look at them and I'm like, wow. I mean, why are you an amateur? Especially when they're like 19 years old or something, but they've been training since they were little kids. They were like 6 years old and started doing BJJ and then added in, wrestling and boxing and Muay Thai. And you just look at them, you're like, the skill level these days is off the charts.
The first two fights of the previous CFFC that was in Tupelo or in Tunica, Mississippi, it was two guys from the same gym. They're both like 19, 20 years old, something like that. I forgot their names. But the first fight, I was like, holy, and this was a debut fight. And I was saying the level of grappling transitions that this guy is doing is beyond me. Thank God I didn't start fighting now. Thank God I did it a decade ago. Because I wouldn't have been competitive with these kids making their debuts right now.
It's unbelievable, especially because you're getting these kids that, that maybe they have like an extensive high school or collegiate level wrestling background. And again, you've had, now you're starting to get these ones where there's kids that are, 11, 12, 13 years old. And they're like, oh, I'm going to be a professional fighter. Like, I'm going to compete in UFC. And they dedicate their entire life to training and getting the skills necessary, where that wasn't the case before. It was like, well, I got done wrestling and I decided I wasn't done with competition yet. So I gave this MMA thing a go. And now I'm trying to catch up on the jiu-jitsu, catch up on the striking, catch up on all that. No, these kids have been doing it from day one, man. There's so much talent out there.
Who were those two kids? Your broadcast partner was cornering them. I remember that.
Yeah, they came from Jersey. They came from part of the Team Taino squad, and I'm trying to remember what event that was as well. They were talented as well.
They were so damn good. Anyways, jump on board the United Fight League. You guys need to watch it. It's great. Frank Mir's on the call. If you want like insight, kind of like Dominic Cruz insight into fighting when he's breaking down positions, Frank Mir is great on a call, by the way.
He's phenomenal.
Yeah, so let's look forward.
By the way, let me, because I wanted to pull that because I wanted to give them the prize. Edgardo Caraballo and Parker Krotman. Those are the two guys that absolutely wrecked shop at CFFC 121. I want to give them their due.
You guys heard it here first. When they're in the big show, you'd be like, I remember Morgan and McMahon were talking about that. Sounds like a law firm, by the way. Morgan and McMahon.
That probably would have been a better career choice for both of us.
Right. Yes, absolutely would have. All right, let's move on. Pay-per-view Fight Week UFC 292 from the TD Garden, Boston, Massachusetts. Aljamain Sterling 22-3 versus the Sugar Show, Shane O'Malley 16-1. Last week we looked at the odds, minus 275. Aljo, has it closed? I don't know. I haven't looked yet.
I am so intrigued by this. I haven't looked at it either, so I'll let you find it and see if it has. I kind of think it will. If I'm going to be honest with you, I think it has. Has it already? Have you pulled it up yet?
I haven't pulled it up yet. I'm doing two-face authenticator right now. Right, so
it's so great.
So just like just keep talking. Just keep talking.
Okay, so I'm gonna let you pull it up because I kind of think it should, and I think it's more competitive. And we mentioned it last week, and I just think that, by the way, the popularity of Sean O'Malley, I think people are gonna be throwing some money on him anyway, just because they're fans of the guy, because he is such a personality. But I am so intrigued by this fight because the styles that they bring to the cage are so, like, they're both so clear in what they're saying. There's nobody trying to hide what they intend to do. There's no, hey, well, I wonder how they're going to come out and what they're going to look like. I mean, Sean O'Malley's like, look, my striking is better than yours, and I'm going to absolutely wear you out on the feet because you can't compete with me in the stand-up department. Meanwhile, Aljamain Sterling is saying, like, my grappling is so much better than yours that I'm just going to run and I'm going to get on your back and I'm going to choke you out, and you don't know how to deal with it. And neither one of them is bluffing. Like, that's literally what they both intend to do. I love this fight. And I believe you now have a number. Has it closed?
What was it last week?
I think you said minus 275.
It was 275, wasn't it? You said anywhere from 250 to 280 or something like that. Now, granted, I'm just looking on FanDuel. It's widened.
What?
290.
Wow. I mean, I'll say it again. I respect people for recognizing, because I think people have been awfully good. The skills that he brings to the table are, I mean, he's solid. There's arguments that he's the greatest UFC bantamweight of all time, and people like John Anik are out there making that argument that it's the case. So I like to see that in terms of, I feel like he hasn't gotten the respect that he deserves. But I'm telling you what, Sean O'Malley's damn good. Sean O'Malley is damn good. That's why I'm so intrigued by this fight, because I really see the possibility of both things happening. I mean, you could clearly see the way either one of these two men can walk away as UFC bantamweight champion.
If O'Malley stays off the cage, it is going to be one hell of a fight. That's what I got to say, right? I believe that a frame like O'Malley, and I got to look, do you know his stats, like how big he is?
He is 5'11", if I remember correctly.
Okay, 5'11", going against an Aljo, who I believe is 5'7".
Right.
Okay. And that's listed. So 5'7", let's call him maybe 5. No, I mean, I bet you he's 5'7". I stood next to him last week.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty accurate. That's still a 4-inch height advantage, and then that wingspan, I've got to think is exponentially bigger, because that's where O'Malley thrives. He's got that wingspan on him. So if there is an opponent that is tailor-made to give him fits, if he can keep space, it's an O'Malley.
It is. It really is. And I'm looking on UFC.com where they do have if you're ever looking for reach stats and leg reach stats, they do put them out there. This is something they've added kind of recently. The reach is only a 1-inch advantage for Sean O'Malley, according to the stats. But I just, when you think about the way they fight, there's one thing to just have a reach. There's another thing to actually use that reach to your advantage. And Sean O'Malley fights long, right? I mean, he throws straight shots. He moves really well. He's slick. I mean, he is really, really good on the feet. And by the way, Sean O'Malley's jiu-jitsu, I think, is a little bit underrated as well. He's got some fantastic grappling skills as well. This man is a problem on the feet. And so Aljamain Sterling is going to have to be cautious when it comes to his approach. I mean, to think that he can just walk out there and like, I'm just going to walk up to you and I'm going to grab you and I'm going to throw you on the ground. It's going to have to be a little slicker than that. And of course, Aljamain knows that as well. But yes, I think both these guys are each other's worst nightmares, if I'm being honest with you. And that's what I think is so intriguing about this, because now look, I'm leaning Aljamain Sterling in my overall pick, just because I really do think he's got that grappling skill set, provides him a lot of opportunities to get to the back. And, he just needs 1 minute to grab that submission but O'Malley on the feet, so quick, so fast, so slick, man. He's
elusive.
So fun to watch, man. He's so fun to watch. So
who are the people that gave, other than Marlon Moraes that had this crazy knee against Aljo, but if you look at the Peter Yan fights, like ultra competitive, obviously everybody thinks that Peter Yan won they fought 3 times, correct? One as a no contest. Aljo won the next 2, but a lot of people think that that Peter Yan won that fight number 2.
Yeah, they do, and it's it was two times, because the first one was a disqualification, and then it was a split decision the second time around. So yeah, that was a DQ. Remember, that's how he won. That's the controversial way that he won the belt, because he won it by disqualification. But you're absolutely right about that. And what is what makes Peter Yan so effective? Because he's slick on the feet and he's got good takedown defense, right?
And that's where I was going with this. Is that if you look at the fight, with the most competitive fight that Aljo had, I'm even going to say Peter Yan, aside from like a dog war that he had with Henry Cejudo, I personally just think Cejudo still kind of won that fight, but you got to beat the champion. In my opinion, you do have to beat the champion to get the decision. But Peter Yan gave Aljo a lot of problems on the feet, right? And he's more of a kind of walk you down fighter. He's engaging in that closeness, which made Aljamain eventually be able to take him down. Aljo had a huge problem with that striking. Now, O'Malley is a better striker, technically better striker and more elusive, and is going to do it with more distance. That is going to be the chess match that Aljo is going to have to go through. And the question really becomes, in my head, is, are you willing to run through that fire?
That's great. And I'll throw out one more thing, that the word that kept popping up in my head as you were talking about the difference between O'Malley and Yan is O'Malley is more dynamic as well, right? He's going to come at you with more tools. As you said, the range is going to be, when you think of Yan, you think of short, compact, and you think of Yan as a really good boxer. Like, he's an incredible boxer. But O'Malley, as you said, a striker. There's going to be kicks. There's going to be knees. There's going to be spinning attacks. He's going to come from all angles. He's going to move offline. He's going to be creative. You're going to see things that you didn't expect to see, that you weren't anticipating. And he can be very, very problematic. So, again, the line still shocks me. On the one hand, kudos to everybody that has finally given Aljamain Sterling the props that he's long deserved and that you've been slow to give him. On the other hand, careful to write off Sean O'Malley at your own risk. I think a lot of people look at him, and look, Aljamain has said it right too, and I think he's kind of set the narrative that a lot of people are buying into, and that have had it all along, that, hey, O'Malley, he's all hype. He's just flashy. He's the weed smoking, hair dyeing, content creator, Conor McGregor wannabe. He's got some Dana White privilege in there because he had the Snoop Dogg, O'Malley, and all. I mean, I think a lot of people look at him and they say hype job, hype job, hype job. When I don't think he is a hype job.
Ask Peter Yan how much of a hype job he is.
He is really, really good. And I think he's rubbed some people the wrong way along the way as well. There was that early on in his career was like, look, I'll fight top 15 when you pay me top 15 money. I'm not fighting top 15 until you pay me top 15 money. And a lot of people took that back and was like, no, I'm not going out there and facing the toughest dude unless you're paying me the toughest dude money.
And that's simple economics. And a lot of people don't want to just kind of admit to that. But hey, go be a boxing fan and tell me then.
Yeah, absolutely. So
because they're not even fighting each other, and they can't even agree on $100 million.
So true. I love this fight, man. I love this fight because I really do think, again, we know what both bring to the table. Both have a clear path to victory. And oh, by the way, fight week, get ready because there's going to be jawing back and forth all week. The press conference is going to be fun. I mean, the face-offs are going to be great. There's a lot going on here, man. I'm excited about this one.
The one thing I do got to bring up in the difference in striking, and as you were saying, like the more elusive and dynamic, and there's more tools in that tool bag of O'Malley than say a Yan that did give Aljo fits, is the angles too, right? So to be able to take somebody down, you need to change levels, blast through, then cut an angle, typically, right? And if you watch O'Malley when he's he's one of those guys that is effective throwing punches while on his bicycle. What I'm meaning is he's throwing and moving at the same time, which typical fighters have to anchor down to the floor, set their feet, then be able to drive power through their hips. O'Malley doesn't have to do that. And so that's what makes this fight of, is a Aljo willing to go through that storm? Because it's not just going to be like, okay, we're going to get in that Muay Thai range or that boxing range, and I'm going to slip under and go for a takedown. O'Malley ain't going to make it that easy.
Right. You're so right about that. Great observation as usual. Like the way he can pivot and hit shots as he's fading away and slipping off, man. It's so unique. But then let's counter this as well. Aljamain's grappling isn't necessarily he's got to hit that straight blast up. No, he's going to come at you. He's not going to quite hit you with a Tony Ferguson Imanari roll or anything like that. But the way he he is going to be able to slip and grab, and he's not necessarily just looking for traditional takedowns. He's that next level grappler, right? Where it's like, I'm just trying to create a scramble because I know if I don't have you in a perfect defensive posture, I can at least grab onto something. I can find an opening. I can get in, and we all know, man, once he gets to the back, the human backpack, the human Jansport, the human anaconda. I mean, his back control is so great. Phenomenal to watch. Let it be Saturday night. I'm ready. Let it be Saturday night.
Here's the deal. When at first I was like, man, I'm not pumped for this fight. Like, I think, Aljo, he's as good as I know. I know how good he is, whether the amount of hate he gets or not. If you're beating a Henry Cejudo, you are that guy. You're that guy. If you beat a Triple C. Right? And then as I stylistically analyze, getting ready for this episode, I'm stylistically analyzing this fight, and I am just clamoring over watching this. Because if you want to say styles make fights, this is the prototype of two converging styles meeting in the middle and seeing what's going to happen. One has to wage war through the fire to get to you. Can the other not do it and use that dynamic striking? If and when it gets there, they both have good chops. We know about Aljo's. We kind of think we know about O'Malley, but who knows against that high level of a guy? This is why the UFC is the UFC, because they are putting on fights like this.
These are the fights that make us fans, man. You laid it out. These are the fights that we live for, because, look at it from everything that you just brought. The styles that these two possess is amazing. You can look at it kind of as like old school striker versus grappler, except it's new school, right? Because neither one of them are single skilled or whatever, but they have areas where they're strongest at. If they're a UFC video game character, we know where the 5 stars is on one and where it is on the other. That's just where they excel at, but they're great everywhere. Then you add in the personalities and the way these two have clashed along the way, and the type of, the type of trash talk that's been there. And then you add in what it means, not just in terms of the belt. Of course, that's the UFC title is what everybody's aspiring to. So not just what it means there, but what does it mean for Merab Dvalishvili, who's been kind of waiting in the shadows? What does it mean for like a Chito Vera, who has a history with Sean O'Malley as well? That could get real fun. I mean, this is the type of fight that, Sunday we're still talking about it. Monday we're still talking about it. Tuesday we're still talking about it. There's some fights that happen, and no disrespect to like Vicente Luque and Rafael dos Anjos. Fight happened. We talked about it. We move on. This one has ripples. It has impact. It has implications on top of it just being an incredible stylistic fight. I cannot tell you how much I love this main event.
Crystal ball the hysteria if O'Malley comes away with the W Saturday night. This guy is going to elevate so much more than he already is onto that stardom level. He is going to be in my opinion, he will be a transcending superstar, not in the world of mixed martial arts. I'm talking about everywhere. If he wins Saturday night.
I agree, because he's one of those guys that already has this. I mean, again, go back to the genesis, right? The Snoop Dogg, O'Malley, and you can't script that, right? It just happens, and it's amazing. Yeah, but that was an iconic moment, right? But then he's continued to build these iconic moments, and he's got, when you talk about Sean O'Malley, and a lot of people say, oh, he's a fake Conor McGregor. You can't even compare him to Conor McGregor. And I mean, Conor McGregor, obviously the biggest star the sport has ever seen. To ascend to that level is tough. But to be up among those, you can't say Sean O'Malley is the next anything. He's the first Sean O'Malley, right? I mean, he is this unique personality, this unique character, charisma. He understands. We talked about the financial aspect, but he gets, he's a Twitch streamer. He's into this. A hard time finding any fault in that argument whatsoever, man. This is a huge moment in his career.
And we are here for it Saturday night from, I assume, a sold-out TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. You are making the trip, are you not?
I'm not, because I'm going to be, it was always going to be a tough one. This was going to be a challenging one. My dad is actually coming to town on Saturday in Vegas. And so I only get to see my parents a couple times a year. And so I was never going to be there on fight night, but I thought I was going to be there for fight week. Because we were going to do a grappling event with CFSC in Boston the week. Unfortunately, just some logistical issues didn't come together, so we had to reschedule it. So I won't be in Boston in fight week at all. I was never going to be there on fight night, but I will definitely do 10. I am actually going to be kind of in the area. I'm actually, I'll be in New York each of the next 2 weeks. The PFL, actually, their playoffs are going on right now in New York. They've already had one event in San Antonio. They're doing 2 more to get the finalists set up for the $1 million. So I'll actually be doing those. So I'm loaded up. I'm excited. I got PFL duties. Then I'm going to come back home to Vegas, hang out with the family, and watch that. I will miss being in the building, but I'm going to be a fan on my couch watching that fight, and then I'll be back out in New York for the final PFL playoff event of this year as well, before the championships in November.
I think I already know the answer to this, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Mm-hmm. Aljo from just south of there in Long Island, New York. And then O'Malley from training out of Phoenix, Arizona, but really from Montana. Who's the home team?
It's going to be Sean O'Malley.
Right.
It's going to be Sean. I hate to say it, man. It's going to be Sean O'Malley, man. People love this kid, and understandably so. He's got that X factor. He's charismatic. He's got that swagger.
And the O'Malley in Boston, Irish Boston, they're going to go nuts for him in that building.
It's going to be a Sean O'Malley crowd. Aljamain Sterling is the visiting team, bro.
God, this guy can't get a break.
I know. It's crazy,
man. Well, we're here for it. Thank you, everybody. Great episode. UFC 51 on ESPN this past weekend, Bellator, and we're looking ahead to just the Garden show. Anytime you get one, there's a couple buildings, and the TD Garden is one of them. Special things are going to happen. You can go ahead and follow my podcast partner and the name that's on the marquee of this podcast, John Morgan _MMA. Follow me on Twitter or X, shall I say, at _Mac Life. I'm McMahon. He's Morgan. We are not lawyers. Enjoy the fights.